Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Green Jeans. I am your one co-host, Annika Van Rossum, using pronouns she, her, along with my other co-host,
Maya Van Rossum, also she, her.
And if you couldn't tell by our last names, we are related. We are a mother-daughter duo, and this podcast is centered around talking about important social and environmental justice issues through a generational lens, because somehow, some way, the issues that my generation is dealing with, my mom has also been dealing with for a very long time. So yeah, Mom, do you want to introduce this week's topic?
I could. We're going to be talking about greenwashing.
Nice. So if you don't know what greenwashing is, it's basically when companies like post like that they're more sustainable, or they're using more sustainable products, like, oh, this is 70% less plastic, or like, oh, we're recycling our clothes and things like that, but the company's not actually that much more sustainable, right? If that's the best way, I think, to say it.
Yes. And it's interesting how the term actually began. It actually, well, it's credited. There's a gentleman named Jay Westervelt, who in a 1986 essay is sort of credited with coining the term greenwashing. And he was talking about a hotel who was encouraging consumers to reuse their towels as a under the auspices of better protecting the environment. But the reality was that they were using it as a marketing ploy to cut their own costs, right? And therefore be able to make more money. Now, truthfully, like, I don't view that as greenwashing. I view that as, smart environmental protection and smart marketing. But that was actually the official first use of the term greenwashing. It has evolved over time to do what you said, which is basically companies sort of misrepresenting that they are doing things in an environmentally friendly way when in fact they're not.
There was like a water bottle company, I remember, and it always weirded me out because I was like, I don't think it really matters. But they were like, and now with our like lids that use like 60-70% less plastic, so it was just like a smaller plastic lid. And I was like, is this really, they think like, but you're buying a whole plastic water bottle, that this is like the thing?
Yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about. And oh, by the way, I just want to say, if you hear a bird in the background, it's because somewhere outside in my native garden that we talked about on a previous show, there is a bird enjoying a little nest that they've created. At least that's what I think, it's that bird. So I'll try to go on mute when I'm not talking, but just wanted to let you know who my little friend was. But yes, Annika, you are right. That is a form of greenwashing. And I actually came up with found a couple of different kinds of examples that are grotesquely interesting and scary. Not scary like scary in people are dying scary, although people die from pollution and contamination, but scary in that the companies not only think they can get away with it, but actually do get away with it, right? Like the company you just talked about. I bet there are a lot of people that chose that water bottle for their different plastic lids.
Yeah, yeah, but let's hear these facts.
Yeah, so and this comes from a blog on the Sustainable Agency. And these are just a couple of examples. One of the examples that was back in 2019, they say it was a controversy in 2019. I actually don't remember this quote unquote controversy. Maybe it's because I don't eat food at McDonald's. But maybe you remember this controversy, Annika, not that you eat food at McDonald's either, but maybe your friends do. But it was, McDonald's had a paper straw that they used, and I guess they were advertising, and it turned out to be non-recyclable. So I guess it was a paper straw, not a plastic straw. It was still a disposable straw. And there was apparently they do raise about well, they say, aside from the questionable practice of cutting down trees to make a disposable straw. So I guess it wasn't non-sustainable tree cutting practices, but just the idea that, you know, you need to cut a tree to make a straw versus just sipping it out of a glass. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that this was an example of a very well-to-do company sort of saying that they were addressing an issue in a meaningful way, but perhaps not so much.
Yeah, I was reading too there. I think it's just in the EU, but that the National Consumer Protection Authorities for the European Commission, this is in an article from like Fordham, that had reason to believe that 42% of cases, the claims like by companies were exaggerated, false, or deceptive, and could potentially qualify as unfair commercial practices under the EU rules for like how their products are more sustainable or more green. So they're like lying.
Yeah, no, the percentages are high, Annika. You're right, and people are increasingly skeptical, and the surveys show that as well. That it's something like 44% of people, when they're concerned thinking about investments and trying to invest in companies that do things sustainably. I think a survey said something like 44% of the people are concerned about greenwashing. I mean, so it's like a real thing. It's not just a term of art, but it's a real concern that people have. Another greenwashing escapade was by the company Keurig, right? Keurig, that's Dutch,
Keurig?
right? Keurig.
I don't know.
Keurig is how Americans say it. I'm
know.
trying to say it in a Dutch appropriate way. I think Keurig. Anyway, so right, like they make those little plastic coffee pods.
Mhm.
Well, apparently, at least in Canadian provinces, they were leading people to believe that those little coffee pods, they're single-use plastic. They were suggesting that they were recyclable, and that if you just sort of open them up and you throw away the coffee, that you could put the empty plastic containers in recycling. And so, you know, that was better than throwing it away. But the truth was that those containers actually weren't accepted in most Canadian provinces as recyclables. And that the ramification of this, right? People might say, oh, well, you know, like, what's the big deal? Well, the ramification of this was that the city of Toronto had to, they say, revert 90,000 tons of plastic pods from recycling bins because of this problem, right? So I guess they say revert 90 tons of plastic pods. I don't think they were talking about the Keurig. The point is that they had to turn back recyclables. They couldn't send them on. They had to send them away, presumably to go to a landfill, because now the recycling had become contaminated by this so much non-recyclable Keurig plastic pods. Like that's not just false advertising, right? That's really inflicting significant harm. There's also, they talk about IKEA. Now, interestingly enough, the blog post does talk about IKEA having great sustainability credentials overall, but then they do talk about that IKEA, which is the largest consumer of wood in the world, which actually does not surprise me, that an investigation by Earthsite found that IKEA had been making their beechwood chairs using illegally sourced wood from the forest of Ukraine's Carpathian region. And this is a region where there are a number of endangered species, including bears, lynxes, wolves, and bison. And the wood was certified. It's what they call FSC certified, Forest Stewardship Council certified, which suggests that the wood was actually harvested in a way that was environmentally friendly. That's what FSC accreditation does. And I actually looked for that on things that I buy. Here, it did get that FSC accreditation, but actually it wasn't legit in this case. And so IKEA got, kudos and probably made money, additional money. And yet they were using this illegally logged wood that was inflicting harm in ecosystems that were critical to a number of species. And then the last example that I just thought to pull from this blog was Windex. And this was as recently as 2020, right? Like these are all recent examples. There are a lot of old timey examples. These are recent examples where there was a lawsuit that was filed against SC Johnson because SC Johnson claimed that Windex products or because their Windex products contained ingredients that were harmful to people, animals, and the environment. Windex claimed that SC Johnson claimed that Windex was non-toxic, but according to this lawsuit, again, it actually contained ingredients that were harmful to the environment, were harmful to people, and were harmful to animals. And so that's classic greenwashing.
Yeah.
Making money off of an environmental lie.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was looking at some companies, and two examples that I found I thought were interesting was H&M fashion. And like, I know they have a like donate your products back, or like you can drop off jeans and stuff, and supposedly they repurpose them. So I'm not sure if this specifically has to do with it, but they said in the Sustainable Agency reported in 2021 that H&M was found to be one of the worst offenders, with a shocking 96% of their claims not holding up. So just like what they did. And then Ryanair, apparently, which is like a UK airline, and it's like it's kind of like, I feel like it's the UK's version of Spirit, if that makes sense. And they got in trouble, and in early 2020, the same article says Ryanair audaciously announced itself to the British public as Europe's lowest emission airline, and that just like wasn't true. And it's just not like, I don't know. I don't know if like a punishment or anything, but yeah, it's just a little bit like crazy that companies can just kind of throw it out there, and people do rely on it. And there are studies to show, I think like 40% of people, is the last number I heard, would pick a brand that's more sustainable, is like the option that they'd rather go for.
Yeah, I mean, I do it all the time. I look, I try to use my own common sense. And so I try to buy things, if there was a plastic option versus a glass option, I'll go for the glass option and do things like that. But then I do also look at whether or not there is FSC accreditation, whether or not the product is relying on sustainably harvested vegetables, or whether or not it is using organic, organic contents like organic cotton or K-pop, or, like I look at these things in pretty much everything I buy, and to know that there are companies that are intentionally lying in order to get your business, and worse than that, I don't want to say more often than not, but often enough, that what they're actually doing is harmful to the environment. It's not just misappropriating my trust and my money, but it is worse. It is taking my money to use it for a product that's inflicting harm and making me complicit in the problem, even though I don't know it. And I think it's just shockingly, disgusting, frankly, and that there should be. I mean, there are nonprofits that are supposed to be watching over these things. FSC, right? That the Forestry Stewardship Council is supposed to be watching over this. And one, that shouldn't be the job of the nonprofit. And then two, to learn that in an accreditation program, which has as much credibility as FSC, that it's not even legit at times, is concerning.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was also like looking up different examples of how companies even like basically greenwash. And so beyond just like making claims of sustainability, but a lot of times it can just be like changing the logo, like making the label on your bottle green or blue, or like throwing some leaves on there, or just like a rebranding. They said consumption figures. This is all from Conserve Energy Future. display of complex data. And I think too, they like companies know most of the time if they just say like 42% of our products are sustainably made. No, like nobody's Googling it. People are just like, oh, that sounds cool. Or like if you're in the mall and you're just trying to find like a new pair of jeans and it's like 30% of this jean is made from recycled plastic bottle. Like most people aren't going to stop and Google and do all their searching. They're just like, oh, great. I'll pay for that. Like people aren't really doing the research.
Yeah, the other thing, you just made me think of it when you were talking about changing the logo. And this is also on the Sustainable Agency website or blog. And they were talking about how Coca-Cola, in order to appear more sustainable and or more healthy, they put a green label on a Coca-Cola product. They called it Coca-Cola Life, with a green label. And, you know, again, just as a way to suggest that it was somehow more healthy for you or better for you. And then they were just talking about how, you know, it's still, and how it still had, it was maybe lower calorie, but it still had a lot of sugar. And, you know, so you're right. Sometimes it's just like slapping on some green and, oh, you know, green this, green that. And suddenly that makes it okay. And that makes it good. And so it is just disturbing how people misuse our trust that way.
Yeah. And I think too, like, I feel like we've talked about this in marketing in a different episode, but like one of the biggest examples of, I guess it's greenwashing, but still like companies being deceitful is the whole, I feel like everybody's done it in middle school or maybe in college, like the carbon footprint, like how big your carbon footprint is. And the company where you can input like everything that you do in a day and it shows how big your carbon footprint is and how you can reduce it. And the company that made that is BP.
Oh no, really? I
Yeah.
didn't know that. Oh.
Yeah, BP made it. So it was like part of this too of like shifting, that's more like shifting the blame and to like see how much bad you are and like it can't be us because your carbon footprint is huge. But yeah, like BP made that.
Yeah, and there has been a lot of that over history, as you said, of that blame shifting, which I think is a whole nother big part of the problem. And then the other thing that we have, right, and they actually have different X washing names for it. So, right, a lot of people these days, people who invest or they have retirement funds that get invested or things like that. We don't all have the luxury of those things, but when people, you know, have the ability to invest, that they try increasingly and thankfully to invest in companies that are more sustainable. And so there's actually a system, it's called the environmental, social, and governance factors that get used to help people decide which companies are more socially responsible, environmentally responsible, but also more broadly, socially responsible. And that's where they try to, you know, invest their money so that they're not investing in some sort of system where actually the money that ends up getting invested in the oil and gas industry. And so even though you're not investing in it directly, you are investing in it in a hop step till you get there. And that's what a lot of those divestment efforts for schools and companies and nonprofits, people going to the board of directors and saying, to the extent that you're investing our funds, we want you to invest them in places and spaces that are responsible and where it is not ending up in the bank accounts of the fossil fuel industry and helping them to advance. But the problem is there too, right? We have this sort of washing. And so now there's also two terms called either sustainability washing or social washing. And that's where, similar to greenwashing, where you have some sort of investment. There are some things that are called social bonds, and there are other where you're investing in companies that are supposed to do social good, and that actually what they're doing is not necessarily good, or it's not demonstrably good. And so people are sort of being induced to invest their funds in these mechanisms that aren't necessarily resulting in that great social impact that the people who are investing in were hoping for. And then there's also now something, you know, they talk about there being transition transition investments. And these are where people are investing in funds that are supposed to be helping with the broader transition of states, companies, governments, communities into pathways that are good in terms of the climate crisis, right? And so there's supposed to be funds that are helping with a positive transition. And frequently that's not actually what's happening. And so now that's either called greenwashing or that's transition washing, because you're not actually helping in the transition. So I now add to this list boob washing. I think that there's boob washing. A lot of people have heard about boob washing, but in case you haven't, right, there is the big guilty actor, frankly, on this is the Susan G. Komen Foundation, and they accept donations from the fossil fuel industry, who then turns around and markets themselves as making donations to the Susan G. Komen Foundation to address breast cancer. And then what they literally do is during breast cancer month, to advertise that they've made these donations, so they're good companies, they put big pink drill bits onto their drilling, fracking
So weird.
equipment. I know, isn't that gross? So weird. And the thing is fossil fuels and fracking are known, scientifically proven to emit contaminants into the environment, into the air, into the water, into the environment, that cause cancers of all kinds and or other health ailments, not the least of which is breast cancer. So here Susan G. Komen is accepting money from the industry, who is contributing to and or in some cases, in some people, causing breast cancer. And for that contribution of money, and I guess breast cancer victims, they get to put a big pink drill bit onto their fracking equipment, which is literally engaging in the practice that is causing the release of the contaminants, contributing to and or causing breast cancer. So I call that boob washing.
I know there's something similar, and I'm going to pre-apologize if I get it wrong. I saw it in a Netflix documentary, and it was like, I think it was What the Health. And it was talking about basically how, I don't know if you remember, but I remember like in the cafeterias when I was a kid, it was like all the milk posters. It was like got milk, and it was like the athletes or the superstars with like the milk mustache. And it was big milk is my favorite. But there was like some kind of funding situation, some kind of like reciprocal between like the American Heart Association and like the dairy industry to like push out milk. And recently in World Animal News reported in like 2019 that over 12,000 doctors disagreed with the American Heart Association recommending children to drink cow's milk. And their basically was just like this whole kind of cross, like, milk is really good for you by this people that are supposed to talk about how to protect your heart, but like it's really not. And I remember like being at school, we had being at the law school, we had 2 years ago, we had a symposium, and there were a bunch of dairy farmers, and they were just talking about like how their products have gone down and things like that. And we asked them like, what could people do to help you? And they were just like, drink milk. And this one guy was talking about how like plant-based milks are really bad, and they're like a scourge for their business and all that anyways, and like plant-based milks are actually not that good for you. But like it is just a whole thing, but there's just a lot of that like cross going on, cross funding.
And the other thing about about cow's milk not being good for you, I mean, some of it, and I also was hearing recently on the news when they were talking about formula for children, and how some cow's milk based formulas had some really significant health consequences for infants that relied on that, dairy based formula. And so that in and of itself should be proof positive that you really have to think twice when you're talking about consuming vast quantities of cow's milk or cow's milk products, as you said, like that daily consumption of milk and other products. But there's also that other side of it. And again, it's part of it is, like always trying to be mindful. And I guess I don't remember when it hit me,
which
but
also, oh, sorry, I was
yeah.
gonna say, I
No,
just
go ahead.
found the report that said the National Dairy Council has made payments to the American Heart Association, which helped develop a new report that says dairy milk should be favored over non-dairy alternatives such as almond milk for children.
Wait. The Dairy
The
Council.
National Dairy Council has made payments to the American Heart Association, which helped develop a new report that says dairy milk should be favored over non-dairy alternatives such as almond milk for children.
Yeah, see, and that's, that really should raise questions when you have industry supported science like that. It raises questions, it raises concerns, and it undermines credibility. And we all rely on these nonprofits and supposedly independent advocates like the American Heart Association to be truthful and honest. And, that raises the specter that something fishy is going on, seeing as previously they didn't hold that position, right? So, when you have flip-flopping of that kind, that's a concern. But I was also saying, right, just also thinking about from a different perspective, cow's milk is essentially, is created by mother cows that just had baby cows. And so if people are taking that milk, what are the baby cows getting? Now, I think that they're allowed to get that milk for a period of time, but certainly not as long as they might have otherwise. And so just this idea that you are having cows make babies to create milk for their babies that are now being taken for humans, that there is just something to me, a concerning disconnect in that whole thought process and the idea of taking baby cow away from the mother so that a young human or an adult human can then drink the milk that the body made for the baby cow.
Which also,
that makes me think twice.
I was say in the What the Health documentary, I remember there's like, and he's like a vegan doctor and all that, blah, blah, blah. But he was just like, think about it. He's like, cow's milk is meant to turn a 50-pound calf into a 100, 200, 300-pound cow. And you think people are supposed to be ingesting that? And I was like, you're right. It doesn't make sense.
Now, I will tell you, I don't do almond milk. I don't do almond milk because almond requires a lot of water. And some of the places where almond grows, at least as I understand it, is places where frack wastewater can be used for agricultural purposes. And so that all just raises environmental concerns for me. And so thinking about what are the ways that milk can be created that doesn't have an additional environmental footprint. And so almond milk is very much marketed, I think, as an environmentally friendly alternative to dairy milk. And yet it actually raises concerns in terms of water consumption where those almonds are grown, that there's so much water that's needed for the almonds that other important human uses and ecological uses get deprived in order to support the almond industry, which in part creates almond milk. So I actually no longer do almonds, almond butter, or almond milk. That's a personal choice. And I tend to use the soy-based products. And, and if anybody has any information on that, I'd like to know about it, right? Because I really do try to be mindful about what I'm consuming and what is the footprint for the earth and for other people. And it is the problem with greenwashing is it's hard for all of us to track everything all of the time. And companies know that. And so they misuse that reality in order to make profits for themselves that can actually be harmful. And that really bothers me.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just messed up. And there's only so much research you can do to figure everything out. And sometimes they're kind of purposefully like hiding it. And if you want to like find out the truth, you have to go down all these rabbit holes. And it's just, so companies should just stop doing it. Yeah.
Companies should start doing it. And then I think, people, when we can do research and share it with one another, we should do that. And I think all of it is, a lot of it is just common sense also, right? Again, that idea, if I'm going to buy a product, am I going to buy it from the company that put it in plastics, or am I going to buy it from the company that put it in truly recyclable tin or glass? Looking at those kinds of options and those kinds of practices, looking at, how companies package their things beyond what they immediately put it in. Are they packaging it? Are they sending it in recyclable paper, or is it coming unnecessarily in a big plastic envelope or plastic wrapping? Thinking about whether or not a company, and often if they do it, they do advertise it, and I guess you have to double check it, but whether or not companies are contributing to nonprofits, taking a look at that is meaningful, as long as it's not being used in this greenwashing way. And I think also really go local. Go to your local businesses, go to your local stores, go to your local beer breweries, go to your local food makers, your local farms, when you can actually talk with the owners, when you can actually see how they're operating, where they're operating, how they behave as part of your community, and try to support those local businesses, because I think that is a really great way to be able to just know firsthand that what you're doing is contributing to a business operation that is really trying to do it, to conduct their operations in a way that is good for the earth, good for the community, and is being sustainable and mindful. And if they're not always, but often, you can see it. You can see it in how they operate. If you see that business owner out in the community and they're advocating for things that are anti-environment, anti women's rights, anti-rights of trans people and gay people, marriage equality, good chance that they're not overall behaving in a way that is truly good for the earth and for the community. And then maybe you take your business to some other local operation. So I think that's sort of a good rule of thumb, to the degree that you can do it.
I agree. And I think with that's a perfect wrap up of this episode. So now you guys all know everything about greenwashing and how to avoid those companies, well, most things. And yeah, just try and do your best, and that's all we can all only do. And I have to remind everybody, if you like our podcast, look at the description below, and you can always make a donation. You can also pre-order the second edition of the Green Amendment book using a link below as well. And yeah, anything else?
Nope, I think that's great.
All right, until